And I just started writing down what I was saying as I was picturing all of this. And I told Laurel about it, and she says, you need to tell Larry. And I try to shrug it off. And she says, no, wait, scratch that. I'm going to tell Larry, because she knew I wouldn't tell him, because I wasn't quite sure if I was ready to be up here. But lo and behold, I am here. I am a teacher. I teach at CSCS here in town. I teach music, and I teach K through 5th grade. And I did not want to become a teacher. I never wanted to be a teacher. And here I am as a teacher. And I would take those spiritual inventory tests in college, and every time it would show up teacher. And I would do them again and again and again, because I was like, okay, hospitality. Come on, this time hospitality or something different than teaching and being up in front of people, because it's really a scary thing. And even children, they are not as reserved as most adults. So I can tell you some stories. I was afraid of those students who would just stand there and say no. And those students who would just, I don't want to do that, and you can't make me. Because I was very timid. I was like, okay, what do I do with these students? I don't know. I don't want to teach. But it's really funny how I came to teaching, and now I love what I do. I really do love what I do. And these kids mean the world to me. I have 4 of my own kids, and they're very precious. But I'm going to talk mostly about my students today. And so I'm telling you maybe some stories, because they're funny little creatures. And so, there they are. Those are my 1st graders, and a few of my 2nd graders got in there. And this is our program we just finished. And I had, every age group was a different time era, because it was about a time machine. So they got to go back in time. And so every grade level got to dress up differently. The 1st graders got to be the 80s. But it was really funny, because I walked up to say hi to them, and they're walking down the hall, and they've got this grimace on their face. I was like, what's the matter? You look great. My mom made me wear this. This looks so weird. I do not want to dress like this. I don't know why anybody would want to dress like this. But I think they look pretty good. They look pretty 80s-like, don't they? And so you can go to the next one. And then I have my 80s kids right up front of there. We've got 83 kids total, and those are just my 1st graders. And then you can go to the next one. These are my 5th graders. They're up there. My son is the one on the left there. He played one of the main characters, which I was really proud of him. And so those are the 5th graders, and they did a great job as well. If you want to go on to the next slide, this is what I'm wanting to talk about. Because working with children constantly, I'm at home with children, I teach children, I love children most of the time. This is really what I'm wanting to get to the heart of. And that's, Jesus really spoke a lot about children. He spoke constantly about them. He called them up onto his lap. He talked about them. And this is the one, it's then children were brought to him that he may lay his hands on them and pray. The disciples rebuked the people, but Jesus said, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for such belongs the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven belongs to people who are childlike. And, and you can even go to the next one, because it talks about we are children. We are God's children. And we kind of get high and mighty in our heads and thinking we're all grown up, we're all mature, and things like that. And I know my kids sometimes, they start trying to act like they're the parent. So, my oldest will try to take over from my youngest. Well, if you don't eat your vegetables, you're going to get a timeout or whatever. And it really takes my authority away in a lot of ways, because he's overstepping who he is as a child. So anyways, go on to the next one, please. Sterling's my clicker tonight. But this is the most important one, because the disciples were arguing about who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Who's going to be the greatest? Who's going to sit on your right? Who's going to be elevated to this important status in heaven? And he says, truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. This really isn't an option for us to become childlike. he even says that unless you're like a child, you don't even see the kingdom of heaven. So, hold on. So I have come up with a few things that I feel like in my prayer that God has kind of revealed. These are some qualities. There's lots of qualities about children. And these are some that really stood out to me that I want to share with you tonight. And of course, I want to make the disclaimer that childlike is not the same as immaturity. I know some kids who are even more mature than their parents, quite honestly. And so this is not to give permission to just be immature and childlike and catty and all that kind of stuff that sometimes comes with children. That is not really what God is talking about there. So, but the first thing that I believe that children are that we should try to be more like, and that is curious. Kids are constantly curious. I think we get kind of stuck in ruts sometimes, and we don't think so much about the what if, that what if factor. Kids are constantly asking questions. Sometimes you just want to say, it just is, okay? It just is. Because you get so tired of trying to answer all of these questions. My fourth graders, I could get into a theological discussion with them every day and they would be happy because they love asking questions. And I don't know, and it's always been that way almost every year, it feels like. The fourth grade, something about that fourth grade, they're kind of coming out of, the younger elementary age. They're starting to get closer to that preteen type stage, and they just are curious. And they're the ones who are like, Mrs. Summeril, sometimes it's hard for me to believe in Jesus. They are the ones who, when we're singing a song at Christmas time, and the phrase was, I'm trying to even think of what the phrase was. It was something like, sin demanded a price that we could not pay. And so, of course, they're like, why does sin demand a price? What is it that we can't pay? The question upon question, I'm like, okay, try to perpetuation. What is that word that he always uses? See, I can't even say it. See, those kind of big terms, they just go over my head as well as their heads. And it's very difficult to try to describe those things to a child, but they are. They're always curious. And they always have, what is rewarding in teaching is those aha moments. Because you'll be teaching about something, and you get to a part, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I get it, and they get so excited. And they have this worth comes from that. Where, if they meet that aha moment, they're like, oh, I get this. I can do this. And, we have in music teaching, we called it the aesthetic experience. And that is when we are teaching in band or in choir, and they're singing, and all of a sudden, all of the notes, all of the instruments, everything just kind of comes together, and it's thrilling. It's like a euphoria-like experience in some ways. If any of you who have ever played an instrument in a band could possibly know, you might know what I'm talking about. I know our band has hit moments like that where it's, whoa, that was cool. And it's kind of, you can't really describe it. It's called an aesthetic experience. But we don't reach those aesthetic experiences without searching for them, without looking for them, you can't meet that aesthetic experience on the first day of band class. The first day of band class, I have kids who are frustrated. They're like, I don't even know how to hold this thing. My arm hurts, Mrs. Summeril, can I put it down? Just constantly, they just struggle with that. And then it's not even until May or April that all of those songs come together. All of a sudden, they're like, hey, this is cool. But it takes a lot of work to get there. It's not something that just happens. They have to seek it out. They have to practice. They have to work at it. And, that's why the pianist working on her senior recital can spend 4 hours in a practice room. And it's not because she gets aesthetic experience practicing the piano. It's because you're looking forward to that. You know what it's like to get to that point. And it's not just for musicians. It's for, even athletes. Athletes would not have that experience, that winning experience, that runner's high, which I have never had. I'm not even sure it actually exists. But I've heard about it, but you can't get to that runner's high unless you work towards it. You can't start where I'm at and all of a sudden be running 20 miles and reach that point. And so, curiosity makes us try again when we fail. It is what moves us beyond failure, because we are curious enough if we put just a little more work into it, if we just try one more time, if we keep trying, what would happen? Thomas Edison, which we all know and some of us love, I think, he was quoted in an interview with his associate, Walter S. Mallory. And in the book, it says, you can move on. Oh, there it is. He said, this Mallory says, "Isn't it a shame that with the tremendous amount of work you have done, you haven't been able to get any results?" To Thomas Edison, which sounds a little presumptuous. But then Edison turned on me like a flash and with a smile replied, "Results? Why, man, I have gotten lots of results. I know several thousand things that don't work." And if he did not work through those several thousand things, we probably wouldn't have lights. Einstein couldn't do math and made mistakes in equations. Yet, because he was curious, look at what he did. He laid the foundation of modern physics. The what if question has to be so strong in our hearts that we don't stop at our failures. Because there is failure, and failure is a constant part of our lives. And if we are curious enough, and we keep seeking, and we keep searching, then we can really step into amazing things that God has in store for us. This is natural for a child. It is when they fall, they get back up, in math class, they'll try and try again, even though they've gotten that wrong, and they just struggle in math. Some kids really have a hard time with numbers, and they get in that math, and they get intimidated, and they get scared, but they have to try, and they keep trying, and they keep trying until they get it. And we need to be moldable by His Spirit, continually growing and searching. Matthew 7 through 11, or 7 through 8, says, "Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks it will be opened." God wants us to seek. I think sometimes we in the modern church get to thinking we're afraid to ask questions. We're afraid to understand more, mainly because we're afraid, well, if we start asking questions, then we might move away from the faith. But the truth of the matter is, if we are seeking God, then He makes Himself found. And I don't see, it just happens when we seek God that He comes to us because He likes that. He likes it when we seek Him. He likes it to be found. He wants to be found. He doesn't want to remain hidden. Complacency is not a natural tendency for a child. They will take things apart to see how they work, and we call them destructive. They will take out everything out of my pantry. This is a true story. Everything out of my pantry, everything. Lay it all out on the floor and in the living room and in my bedroom and call it a grocery store. And I'm like, oh, look at the mess. They will, another true story, they will wrestle, they'll touch, they'll pull on each other, they'll trip each other, they'll do all of this stuff that brothers do constantly. It's also called male bonding, I suppose, is what I've been told. And, but they're communicating, and they're learning how to be brothers, and they're learning to be close to each other. And yet, they can be called, when they're doing that, overactive. But they are wired that way. They are wired to take things apart. They are wired to pull stuff out of the pantry and put it all out and be creative and communicative. Thank you. So, if we live in an unchildlike world where these kids are called destructive and messy and overactive, but they're just being how they are. They're just being who they are. And that makes it a lot easier for us adults sometimes to have patience with that. There is so much about God we don't know, and so much He wants us to understand. And unless we become childlike, we become complacent ourselves. This is one of my favorite quotes that I found. It is by St. Augustine of Hippo. And it says, if you think you understand, it isn't God. If you feel like you've reached that place of understanding where you understand everything there is to know about God, it isn't God that you're understanding. It might be religion. It might be what you want God to be like. But there are so many facets to God and so many angles that we cannot possibly ever stop learning about God. And Proverbs 2:3-5, he says it's like gold. It's like silver. To search, you will find silver. You seek like hidden treasures. And then you will find understanding. And I think the understanding is a continuous understanding. It is not a destination. It is one of those journeys where you are constantly knowing more and knowing more and knowing more. The religious leaders in Jesus' day thought they understood. And not so much. I truly believe that lack of curiosity leads to bondage. You can become subject to what you believe so sternly that you are not looking at the bigger picture. And the greatest threat to communism and to any kind of fascist societies is thought and searching and knowledge. They didn't want you to know. They burn books all the time because they don't want you to know or ask questions and to know anymore. So I'm going to skip some of this because I think I wrote too much. But that's okay. George MacDonald said, "It is the heart that is not yet sure of its God that is afraid to laugh in its presence." The heart that is not sure of its God. We cannot be sure of our God until we ask questions, until we seek Him, until we know more about Him. And of course, we seek the kingdom of God above all else, which I think I have that, yep. And then also 1 Corinthians 2:10 says He will show us God's deep secrets. There are deep secrets. The Spirit of truth will lead us into all understanding. All right, second thing is what are children like? They are creative and constantly creative. This is a very sad statistic, or quote, I should say. In our society, at age 5, 90% of children are considered highly creative. By age 7, the figure drops down to 10%. And adults, high creativity is only 2%. And his quote says that it's not the outside force, but through criticism and innuendo. It's those moments of you weren't good enough, you're not creative enough. What makes you think that you can do something like that? Those thoughts, and those are planted by sometimes ourselves, sometimes the enemy, but other people as well. And we are meant to be creative. God's first command to Adam was to be creative. Name all the animals. That was a very creative act, to name anything. And there is a book, it's a fiction book. It's called A Refuge Assured by Jocelyn Green. But I love this quote. A little backstory. It is about a lace maker who comes to America to escape the French Revolution. So she makes lace. And what she says, or what the book says, God is the creator, is he not? She had said. So when we create, even if it is a mere length of lace and not the stars in the heaven, we honor him. We bear his likeness when we work. I really like that. We bear his likeness when we work because he is creative. He always has been creative, and he continues to create. He creates people into new beings all the time. No other animal is creative who has the ability to create something. Also, Jesus gave his disciples the job to create. When he gave them the baskets of the fish loaves, he said, you go feed the people. You go feed the people. The dry bones. When Ezekiel was standing there in the valley of dry bones, God said, you call the bones forth. I want you to say this. And he did, and the bones came forth. Actually, flesh and all of that stuff. And so it takes faith to speak to dry bones, to come alive. That was not an easy thing. In the book of Exodus, there is a man by the name of Bezalel, and he was a master craftsman. And God said, the Lord specifically chose him for the building of the temple because of his skill. And, you know, when the Israelites came out of Egypt, all of the Egyptians just poured gifts on them, like, get out of here, just take all of our stuff, go, leave us alone, so stop putting all these plagues on us. And so they had so much cloth and jewels, and they put it into the temple, and towards the temple they gathered all this stuff. But you need somebody creative enough to make those tapestries and to make those whatever curtains and all of those kinds of things. And even like the bowls had to be melted and molded and crafted. And Bezalel, he was asked to do that. And I think that's a big job. I would be a little intimidated. You want me to do this for your temple? Okay, here we go. So you have to wonder. But God chooses people constantly to be creative. I do believe creativity is the most aggressive, most powerful offense possible in this world that needs him. I think creativity is what can bridge the gaps into people's lives. If you think about music, there's so much music that crosses and pulls people into them. There are books that pull people into Christ and knowing more about Christ. Think about probably one of the most important pieces of literature would be Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. It not only fueled an abolitionist movement, but many hold it even responsible for the Civil War, why it even started in the first place. When Abraham Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe, he actually quoted, and this is a quote, so this is the little lady who started the Great War. From a book. And she didn't have to go and speak on the book. She didn't do any of that. She just wrote a book. And power of the written word, I don't think we quite, well, even the shack. We think about the shack and the difference the shack, it's kind of upset a lot of theologies, and it's kind of shaken the world up a little bit and making people question and, oh, God, what are you like? You know, and so there are other things. The Canaan hymns. This is Chow Min, I believe is how you say her name. She was unable to sleep one night, and the Lord gave her a song. This is in China. This is communist China, where religion is outlawed. She does not know how to read music or speak music, and the Lord gave her a song. And then another, and then another, and then another. She ended up writing 930 songs, and they became the movement for the underground church in China. And from one girl. And she wasn't very old. I don't know how old she was, but I think if I remember right, she was in her teens. She was not very old, and she never even wrote a note. She couldn't even read a note, let alone write a note. But yet God used her still. C.S. Lewis presented the gospel in the Chronicles of Narnia. And that, even my boys reading it, we were reading it, and they even could, without me even talking about how Aslan represents Jesus and stuff like that, they even know it already. They're like, that's what Jesus does for us. I'm like, yes. And it made a very picture that the boys could kind of picture through the story about how Jesus stood in our place. The creative culture really shifts society. I mean, if you look at even Vietnam, the music and all of the stuff that went into there, you can see it reflected in what was going on in the culture. We might not write anything earth-shattering like The Shack, and we probably won't even write any book, for one, And some of us might feel like, okay, creative, that's fine, but I am not artistic, which is good, because if we were a world of artistic people, it would not be very good. We wouldn't have any numbers, and they would just be all scattered and all over the place. But we also don't want all numbers people where everything is like this, because if it was, I don't think I'd want to live there, because it would drive me nuts. And so too many numbers just, So we need creativity in that area as well. We need creativity in business. We need creativity in science and innovation. I know Doug's group, they're doing a lot of creative things. Well, I think so, with a lot of innovations in science and all that stuff, because creativity is God, the Holy Spirit. He is the biggest creator ever. And if he can actually work through us, what can we create? What can we come up with? That business plan that might outweigh the others, that even in numbers, there's got to be a creative way to present things. Teachers have to be creative. They could be a math teacher, but they need to be creative enough to present that to the kids. Creativity is everywhere. It's not just in the fine arts. And a lot of us don't feel very creative. But I really like this quote, and it's by Dan McCollum. And it says, excellence is integrity of resources. So we don't know why God gives some people huge amounts of talent. And we don't know why some have smaller amounts of talent. I mean, in the parable of the talents, Jesus gave one person, or the guy, gave one guy the one talent, then he gave the next guy 5 talents, and then he gave the next guy 10 talents. Who knows why he divided them up that way? But it was the guy with 1 and 5 that was commended. The guy with 10 went and hid them and didn't even use them. And so it doesn't matter who has more talent. Do I have enough talent to do this? Do I have enough talent to do that? Oh, I'm not creative enough. I think that if we really allowed God to work through us, I think we'd be surprised at what God would come up with through us. You know that song, I Love You, Lord? I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice. That is probably sung in how many churches every week for the last, 20, 25 years? I mean, it's an old song. And I think it's probably still sung almost every week somewhere. Somewhere is someone singing that. And it was written in, I think she only wrote one. It was written by a housewife living in poverty. She was living in a trailer on the high desert in Oregon. And she was just, Lord, her toddler was probably banging some pans over here. And she was just trying to spend some time with the Lord. And he gave her a song. And she wrote it down. And how many people can honestly say, when you sing that song, it touches your heart. And you feel the Lord, and you really love to sing it. And so it's as simple as that. She just wrote down what she heard. It was not a complex thing. I don't know if she knew music. I don't know. Maybe she did. I don't know. But it's not in how much you have. It's how you use it. So, third thing. that I'd like us to be. What does it mean, childlike? Unhindered. Because I put this strategically after creative because it can be a little intimidating when we have something in our heart that's creative. Or we want to be creative, but we don't know how to be creative. We have that business thing that we need a creative approach to, or something like that. Children are very unhindered. And my favorite part of my job is leading worship in chapel for these kids. And you can see even the youngest ones at kindergarten, oh, they're dancing and they're singing and they're just happy and they're clapping, their hands are waving, and they're just going. And by the time you look at the fifth graders, they're like, is somebody else watching me? I'm very aware of somebody potentially judging my actions. Are they going to laugh at me? Are they going to, those kinds of feelings. But the little ones, they could care less. My favorite stories to tell are about a little girl, and I just adore her. In first grade, not very old, we give out VIPs during chapel, and those are just simply very important person awards. So when a teacher notices a kid doing something extra special, they'll get a VIP, that kind of stuff. And so she gets a VIP. Most kids, when they go up, they act a little shy. There's 80 other kids sitting there, plus adults, plus parents a lot of times come. And so there's several people there. They kind of act a little shy, and they walk up, and they get the award, and then they go back. Yeah, not this girl. She dances up there like she's a cheerleader of some sort. I mean, she just skips, and then she hoots, and she just raises her head and just starts hollering like this was the greatest gift ever. And we have all those fifth graders back there watching them, and all these fourth graders, they don't bother her. She's just who she is. And I think we should just be who we are. Who cares if there's some fifth graders watching who are still scary, even as an adult? But they just are who they are. Another instance, same child. I have lots of stories about her. She's funny. She was in kindergarten at this time. Most of the kids love to tell stories. They love to tell you I went skiing this weekend. We got a new puppy. Just stuff all the time. And you almost have to kind of channel it because they would just talk. And then the other kids are like, oh, come on. This girl, she raises her hand. But they say from their seats. They just kind of sit there and they tell me. This little girl raises her hand and they said, yes. And she comes up. She bounds up in front of the class, just like this. And she just stands there as if she was in charge and says, yes, I would like to tell you all what I did this weekend. And she just starts telling. One kid started to raise her hand. She says, please hold your questions to the end. And then she just keeps on going about something. And at the end, she does take questions. And I'm thinking, if you've got this, I could use a cup of coffee because I think you're doing just fine with the kindergarten class. But she was just unhindered. There was nothing holding her down, holding her back. She was just who she was. And I love that about her. And every child has different strengths and different weaknesses, and they don't become aware of those weaknesses until they are shown those weaknesses. And kids who are in preschool or going into preschool, they don't know the alphabet until they get around a bunch of kids their age who know it and they still don't. And automatically they want to shut down because they're like, why don't I know it? Does that mean I'm not smart? Does it mean that I'm stupid? I mean, it creates a whole set of questions for them. And I think we need to live in that stage where we're not aware of the questions, we're not aware, and maybe even in the Garden of Eve, or Garden of Eden, the tree of good and the knowledge of good and evil, maybe that's part of that. Because maybe knowledge of good and evil is knowing when we're not good at something, and when we are good at something. And I'm not sure if we were meant to even know. I'm not sure if we were even meant to compare ourselves to other people. Quite honestly, I don't think we were, because when I went into college, I was a piano major, and I was going to do music teaching because I couldn't imagine my life without piano, and how can you play piano and make a living at it unless you're teaching? So that's why I was becoming a teacher. And this other girl came in, and she was good. She was really good. Yes, very much better than me. And I became so intimidated, and I didn't want to play anymore to that extent. But I have a completely different set of skills than she did. But in my mind, she was better than me. So why would I even go for it? If that makes any sense. I mean, I think we deal with that a lot. I think we deal with that in our jobs. We deal with that in our families even. And we were not meant to compare ourselves to others. Children don't run because they think they're going to be the best runner and that they're going to get that medal. Children run because it's in them to run. They always are running. Children sing. My daughter, Allie, she just sings. Top of her lungs, she sings. But she's not singing because she wants a recording contract. She's just singing because it's in her heart to sing. And I think we should just do what's in our heart to do. Yes, strive for excellence in learning, because like I said, children are also curious. And if we have something in our heart, we need to learn about what it is in our heart. But also, we just need to do it. And it becomes that aesthetic experience. We can get that. And so, the widow's mite. I love that story in the Bible where they're sitting at the gate of the temple, I believe it was, and all these people are putting in these bags and bags of treasure in their tithes and their offerings, and and they almost make a show out of it. I'm going to give more than so-and-so. I'm going to give more than so-and-so. And they're just giving. This widow comes up, and she has a little mite, and she gives it. And Jesus, I'm trying to remember the story, but she gave more than all of those other people combined because it was all she had. She gave what she had. She gave it proudly, and she gave it without hesitation. And I think sometimes we feel like what we have is so small that it doesn't really matter. But it's like that widow's mite. We give it anyway, and who knows what God can do with it. And I think it could be something great. And, really no one was qualified in the Bible. Moses stuttered and had anger issues. Jacob cheated and lied. Mary, who was sweet, was probably very inexperienced and was a teenager. Nathanael, in the Gospel of John, laughed that nothing good can come out of Nazareth. And Jesus saw right to him. But Jesus called him a genuine son of Israel, a man of complete integrity. God loves to qualify the unqualified, and I believe he wants to do that for all of us. So I guess I would urge you to give your widow's mite so that God could use it and make it abundant. So I guess that's all I have. And so, thank you. So now what?